You see the headlines every single month, right? Jobs report surprises, inflation ticks up. Well, behind almost all of that crucial economic news, there's one single agency, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS. You can think of it as the government's data engine, our economic compass. But here's the big question. What happens when that compass seems to be pointing in the wrong direction? When the numbers we all rely on get revised. And not just by a little bit, but by a lot. The stakes here are incredibly high, and it affects every single one of us. Okay, so let's really dive into this. In this explainer, we're going to break it all down. First, what the BLS actually does. Then, how the Federal Reserve uses its data. We'll get into why the BLS makes projections in the first place, and what happens when those numbers change so dramatically. And finally, we'll tackle the big debate. Should they just stop forecasting altogether? So first up, let's just lay the groundwork. What exactly is this agency that has so much influence over the economy? The BLS, what is it? Honestly, the best way to think about it is as the official scorekeeper for the entire U.S. economy. It's their job to go out, gather the numbers, and report the unbiased facts that everyone, from Congress to Wall Street to you and me, relies on to figure out what's really going on out there. And you definitely know their work, even if you don't know the name BLS. They're the ones behind the huge reports we hear about constantly. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, that's how we measure inflation. The monthly unemployment rate and those non-farm payroll numbers, that tells us all about the job market. And there's a bunch more that together give us a snapshot of the economy's health. Okay, now here's where this gets really, really critical. This data isn't just for news headlines. It's literally the compass used by the most powerful economic institution in the country, the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve basically has two main jobs. They call it their dual mandate: keep people employed and keep prices stable. But to do that, they need good, reliable information. And that's where the BLS comes in. Its data provides those critical insights the Fed absolutely needs to make decisions. Without it, the Fed would pretty much be flying blind. So how does this actually work? Well, it's a pretty direct chain of events. The BLS releases a report. Let's say it shows unemployment is rising. The Fed's committee grabs that data, and if they're worried, they might lower interest rates. That makes it cheaper for businesses to borrow money and hopefully hire more people. If inflation is the problem, they do the exact opposite. And those decisions, they directly affect your mortgage, your car loan, pretty much the entire job market. Now, beyond just reporting what's happening right now, the BLS also tries to look into the future. But there is a really, really important distinction we need to make here. The BLS makes projections, not predictions. So what's the difference? Well, a prediction is like saying it will rain tomorrow at 2 p.m. A projection is more like saying, based on all the current weather patterns and historical data, there's a really high chance of rain tomorrow afternoon. See? Projections are informed, educated estimates. They're not guarantees written in stone. And who's using these projections? Oh, just about everyone involved in the economy. You've got policymakers using them to plan for things like workforce training. Businesses use them to guess how many people they'll need to hire down the road. Educators design college programs based on which jobs are going to be in demand. And of course, job seekers, maybe someone like you, use them to help plan a career path. And this brings us right to the heart of the whole issue. What happens when the initial data, the numbers that literally move markets and shape policy, turn out to be, well, wrong? Okay, first, it is important to know that revisions are a normal, transparent part of this whole process. The first report that comes out each month is always just a preliminary estimate. The BLS then revises it over the next couple of months as more and more data comes in. So it's a feature, not a bug. It's designed to get us closer to the actual truth over time. But recently, these normal revisions have become absolutely staggering. In September of 2025, the BLS dropped a bombshell. A preliminary revision suggested that over the past year, the economy had actually created 911,000 fewer jobs than we all thought. I mean, that's not a rounding error. That's a completely different story about the health of our economy. So why are the revisions getting so huge all of a sudden? A massive piece of this puzzle is that fewer and fewer businesses are actually responding to the surveys. The response rate has plummeted all the way down to 43%. Just imagine trying to guess the final score of a football game when you could only see less than half the field. Your initial guess is just not going to be that reliable, and that leads to these huge swings later on. You combine that with a volatile economy, and you've got a recipe for these massive changes. And this isn't just a one-off event. It's become a pattern. We saw a massive downward revision back in 2024, then more cuts in the middle of 2025, and it all culminated in that huge 911,000 preliminary revision. This consistent trend of overestimating job growth is what's sparking this really intense debate, and even some political attacks. Which, of course, leads us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. Given all these challenges and all the controversy they create, should the BLS just get out of the forecasting business completely? There are some really strong arguments on both sides here. The case for stopping is pretty clear. It would boost their credibility by having them focus only on hard data. It would free up some strange resources to improve that data collection, and it would shield the agency from all these political attacks. But the arguments against stopping are just as powerful. These projections are absolutely essential for planning, for the government, for businesses, for workers. The Fed relies on them, and if we didn't have a public forecaster, we'd be left relying on private ones, which might not be transparent or accessible to everybody. Let's just stop and think about the real-world stakes for a second. If the BLS stopped projecting, the Fed would be navigating with less information, and that could lead to policy mistakes. Businesses might completely misjudge their hiring needs. Students could pour tons of money and time into fields with no future. The government would be flying blind when it tries to set up workforce training programs. The ripple effects would just be enormous. So it really all comes down to this one question, a choice between two imperfect options. Do we rely on a compass that sometimes needs to be recalibrated, accepting that projections are, by their very nature, uncertain, or do we just throw the compass away entirely and try to navigate this incredibly complex modern economy completely blind? That's the question right at the heart of this whole debate over the future of our economic data.